really quick today. We'll go and get started. So I want to talk a little bit about how you secure data in an AI ecosystem. So what's a little different from this talk than probably a lot of the other talks here today is that I am by nature a defensive person in the cybersecurity space. I'm not an offensive security person. I'm not an ethical hacker. But with that being said, I have them that work for me, and I've been around it for a long time. But by trained trait, I'm more defensive. But we do want to talk about understanding the threat landscape as it pertains to AI, because without understanding your threat landscape, without understanding your risks, you're not going to be able to do a good job of protecting it. But also as an attacker, the better you understand how a system's built and how what countermeasures are in place, the better you're going to be able to effectively attack those systems, as well as validate the controls that are in place. Because as ethical hackers, that's ultimately what our job is to do, is to validate a system is protected as advertised. So my name is Patrick Carter. I'm the Senior Practice Director for Data Protection, Cloud, and AI Security at a company called Cyderis. We're one of the sponsors here. As I can say, I'm betting you guys aren't going to read past 2 bullet points. But I've been in the industry for about 18 years now. The last 5 of those years have really been spent in cloud and AI space, really kind of diving deep into LLMs and understanding how we use machine learning, not only from a security operations standpoint, but how do you actually protect it. So before we get started, well, actually, I already asked you guys. Never mind. At that point, it's where I have to pause to ask, what do you want to get out of it? So common threats of AI and understanding, okay, how do we really want to go about attacking AI? And really, you got to look at it at a couple of different levels. Probably one of the things that's interesting about AI, as well as other applications, is if you look at it, it's doing a lot of the things we already, as attackers, we already know how to do at an infrastructure layer, at an API layer, attacking, doing DOS attacks to try and overload the GPUs and things like that. So these are all things that, as pen testers, you know how to do. It's just applying them to an AI application. What is a little different, though, is when you really start getting into the model-based threats and understanding, okay, how do you get, through like prompt injections, through prompt engineering, how can you get an AI how can you get them to, reveal secrets? Doing things from everything, whether it's like giving up secrets to giving up, like your keys to like, we took one, and through prompt engineering, we were to actually allow them, it gave up all their cert information for, their root certs, which is crazy to think of, but they didn't, there wasn't a countermeasure within in the language model to actually prevent that. So it's doing things like that. The other thing is model stealing. So again, through prompt engineering, being able to actually, steal individuals' models, steal intellectual property through that, which is a pretty cool type of attack. These attacks do take time, though. So that's something else you got to think about when you're actually, doing it. Is, okay, how do I do this? As well as like adversarial attacks, which is really where you look at how do you actually the different queries, and you trick your model into making harmful or bad decisions. So how can you do that? How can you create sub-prompts that are behind the main prompt that the users are going to interface with to actually prevent that from going through and doing bad things? And one of the things I always say is, okay, when you're an attacker, what's your goal? What's the outcome you're looking for by being able to compromise this AI application? Are you looking to disable it, make it where it's non-usable? Are you looking for it to make, provide, false responses? And that's really relevant with generative AI, but especially as we get more into agentic AI, which is AI that's starting to make decisions on its own. That's not going to be AI that's just telling you what to do, but AI that's actually taking that action on its own. If you can now poison it to make bad decisions, that becomes a really powerful attack, especially when you start looking at like nation-state actors and things like that, and the things they're able to do. All things to kind of consider as you're planning your attack is what you're trying to get out of it, because that's going to tell you what layer you want to attack, whether it's the model itself, whether it's the infrastructure that's underneath that makes up the application, or whether it's the data, which is really where I wanted to focus today. Okay, so what are kind of some of those key challenges around data security with AI? And what you really have to remember with AI, data is the lifeblood. The most important part of any AI application is the actual data itself, because that's what makes it work. I know people put a lot of thought into, the actual, the LLMs themselves and how the models are put together. Yes, that's important, but no matter how great your model is, it's only as good as the data that it uses. So what are some of the key challenges that we have to face as defenders against attackers? Well, big thing is data leakage. I think everybody kind of assumes that that's the big thing we're trying to protect against, is the actual, how are you going to steal my data, from my AI? But also, the other thing is shadow AI, which is something that I see in so many of my clients right now, where you'll have a business team that goes out and just starts using ChatGPT or Genesis or any of the other ones to create some business function, but they're putting no security controls around it. They're mapping it to like their entire online, like a good example is their Office 365 environment. They were using client's accounting team took Copilot for modern applications and then integrated it into their entire Office 365 tenant, which included SharePoint, OneDrive, their email. So if you think about the data that it now had access to, it was really kind of unbelievable, because this individual customer used their SharePoint site to store literally all of its documentation, terabytes of it. So okay, now you just gave it permissive access across that entire site with no restrictions, and the security team was not aware of it. So that shadow aspect is really, really important. So as data sprawl, again, kind of going back to what I was talking about with understanding where your AI applications, where the trainable data sets are, where the data that it's pulling from, that's really important. And having that in a controlled space versus sprawled across your environment. Weak access control, so I think this is where we're going to talk about zero trust a little bit towards the end, is okay, well, how, even though the quote unquote true zero trust might not be realistic for most organizations out there, how can you put strong identity and access controls in place to protect the data that the model's going after? And then lastly, compliance. We have to deal with the government regulators. So how do we ensure we're not, especially like in healthcare? I don't know does anybody here work with healthcare or banking? So, okay. So yeah, so PHI I think is really important. We work a lot with health organizations. So how do you maintain, HIPAA compliance, PHI, and even high trust if you're now using AI applications? So really important aspects of it. I just thought this was a cool slide. It's a divider slide. You can ignore. Before I go any further, any kind of questions, any thoughts on, I guess, the challenges that we've kind of laid before us as when it comes to data and AI? Anything you guys are seeing in your own, whether it's within your own companies or customers you work with? You guys are really, I guess that's what I get for speaking right after lunch, though.
Okay. So I assume that this is more focused on, like, say, the commercial aspects of using AI systems, not necessarily training and running your own models.
So like your own personal models, you mean?
Personal enterprise.
Yeah, so this, I would say it absolutely applies to enterprise models that you're developing for your organization. What I would say is it's not necessarily going to be focused around, hey, I want to build this new AI bot to help me with this very specific task that I do as a tester, or like with me, and like I wrote an AI application to help me with managing my engineering team. They're doing their time management. Like that's not something that this is really going to apply to. This is going to apply to, hey, we want to create an AI application to help with customer service for our hospital, or to help with billing, for example. So there's an interesting use case I read about where HCA is actually developing AI to help with medical coding and billing. So that's a great application that's going to have access to, PCI data to PHI data, because it's got to be able to do that coding and then effectively bill for it. It's also going to have access to PII as well, because you have to be able to mail that bill and so on and so forth. So how do you protect that data? How do you maintain compliance, especially across multiple jurisdictions, like a company like HCA, which operates in the lower 48 states? I don't believe they have, you may know, does HCA have application or facilities in Alaska or Hawaii? I don't think they do. I think it's just lower 48.
I think so, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, but it's a good example of like where, for California, they have to deal with CCPA, whereas, for patients outside of California, you don't have to. But here's a great example of okay, let's say you have a California resident that goes to the emergency room in Tennessee, they're actually still subject to CCPA regulations because that is a California resident. So how do you ensure compliance against something like that in an AI application? How do you build that into your model? It can be done, it just takes thought and has to be considered. Okay, so the first thing, just kind of talk about is governance when it comes to AI. So like everything, when I was growing up, my dad, my after-school job was, he made me work for a home builder. So my analogies always kind of drift back to how do you build a house, right? The foundation is how do you govern? You never want to build a house on a crappy foundation. Same concept. You don't want to build an AI application. And that's what we're honestly seeing so much of right now is clients are running so fast to get their AI. They want to be first to market. They want to have that application out. They want to be using it. They want to be able to say, look at us. We're doing this buzzword. That they're not stopping to think about the governance layer. They're not looking at, okay, what are acceptable usage policies, not just for the application itself, but for the data that's associated with it. Going back to, hey, the data is the lifeblood. What are those usage policies? Are they even considering AI ethics? So if you guys, there's a couple different really good courses out there on AI ethics. If you haven't had a chance to look at it, I recommend it. It's some really kind of crazy stuff. For me, being a child of the 80s and early 90s, it makes you think of Terminator when you think of AI ethics. Like, okay, where is that line in the sand on what we want? Especially as agentic systems are coming out that can make decisions. Like, what do we really want? The other thing is transparency within AI. Nobody will, especially in an enterprise type of environment, healthcare, banking, things like that, they really want transparency and accountability. So making sure you're able to have those processes, those procedures in place. And I know it's cliche. I know, as a technologist and an engineer, I'm not a big fan of, governance. It's like I always look at that kind of stuff. It's like, it's just getting in the way of what we're doing. But if you don't have that, you're really setting yourself up for some rogue behavior and putting yourself into significant technical debt down the road because you're going to have to go back and remediate it once it eventually is established. So that's kind of the first conversation I always like to have with my customers. Like, all right, have you done this yet? And I actually met with a Canadian client last week about this very same thing because they're running towards AI for their manufacturing, but they haven't even thought about governance for it. And they're like, well, we'll do that after the fact. And I was like, well, that's a decision you can make as a business, but I absolutely recommend against it because then you might put yourself into a corner. Like you need to at least start having these conversations, even if they're in parallel. So any thoughts, comments, questions on the governance layer?
What was that you mentioned? There's some AI ethics information resources.
Yeah, there's a couple different classes on it. LSU teaches a really good one. So that's the one I know. I took that one, but that's a good one. I know Harvard has one as well. I haven't really looked into the syllabus of it in depth, but I know they have one.
So where in the model do these ethics governance get implemented? Because some of this, which has been done post facto, some of the LLMs, if an output has a racist word in it, don't use it.
Yeah.
Very often become very unsatisfactory.
Yeah, so I mean, that's one way to look at the ethics of AI. I'm talking about it more in the sense of within your organization, right? And what do you believe are ethical decisions and tasks that AI model can complete on behalf of your business?
Well, in other words, take the example that you had about the certs.
Yeah.
How would you prevent someone from giving away the certs, not to put them in the model in the first place?
Yeah, so that's not an ethical question to me. That's a security question. That's handled. There's a couple different ways you can handle that with policy management as well as making sure you don't allow like prompt injection and things like that. Where I'm talking about with AI ethics is really around what you allow your AI systems to do. So think at a overarching strategic level, what is AI going to be able to do within your organization versus what are we saying no? That's, in a lot of companies right now, the big thing they're doing is even though they may have agentic models that can make decisions, they're saying we're not letting AI make decisions. We're always going to have human in the loop. So that any decisions made at that level by a human, not the AI system itself. I see that changing. I see people, especially for lower level tasks, I'll give a good example. So we do manage SOC services. we are in the process of, basically using AI to extend the capabilities of our level 1 SOC analysts. So now a level 1 analyst can do 4x the work they could do 6 months ago because of AI. But they're still the person is making those decisions. Within the next 12 months, some basic decisions are going to start being made by AI. Things like, okay, what is or is not a false positive? Versus right now, it's offering a recommendation that the analyst is reviewing and saying, yes, this is a false positive, or no, this isn't. Having our AI bots actually make that decision. Because what we found through testing is in reality, AI is more accurate, which is crazy to think of, but it's also, if you really, from a compute standpoint, you definitely, computers are often more accurate than humans.
So in some of these situations, there are regulations that govern this. How the regulator presumably wants to know why the AI made the decision.
And that's where the transparency part comes into place. And yeah, I mean, I think we're going to start seeing more and more AI regulations come down. I know there's a bill in Congress right now in the House of Representatives around AI regulation, and I'm curious to see the contents of it. I have not, had the opportunity to. So its entirety has not been released to the public that I'm aware of. So I haven't seen the full breadth of it. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what that means, because if you look at from a political standpoint, big tech is really in a strong position to influence political policy right now within the U.S. So are they going to influence more in favor or in lieu? And I think it's going to be in favor. So.
DoD, US Fed actually has a good ethics framework for AI stuff, so I think that's a good reading.
Yeah.
Reference as well. It's not a course or anything. It's a good resource.
Yeah.
I don't want to derail you or refute anything, but I think the governance that I see is not the foundation, but the building codes and the fire codes. Do you think that it's going to take, a Chicago fire, a warehouse fire, and lots of deaths for it to turn into a real thing?
Yes, I agree. So yeah, I mean, I definitely see how you're saying, hey, this is the building codes, right? I definitely see what you're saying, especially if you look at the regulatory side and the ethics side for sure. Do I think it's going to take a Chicago fire? Absolutely. Now, will that mean human deaths? Probably not. I think it's going to be more financial cost. And what it's going to cost us. But that being said, with what the military, and not just the U.S. military, especially the Chinese military, are doing right now with AI to predict. So there's been some really interesting war games they've been doing with AI, and the Chinese have been able to really predict U.S. military responses to actions, and as well as tactical moves in a battle space with AI. So if that holds true, and I'm not a military expert, so this is just what I've read. But if that holds true, and AI is going to have an active role in the battle space of the next major war that we fight, the country that can use AI the most effectively is going to have a significant both strategic and tactical advantage. And what does that mean, right? So it's kind of interesting you say that. So it could be significant death in what we talk about from a human factor, not just financial loss. But I think more apt, because we're on a freeway doing 150 right now with AI in the commercial space. So I think it's going to be more financial loss, and probably within the next 12 to 18 months. So. All right. But no, that's a good point you said with the building codes. I like that analogy as well. I'm going to probably steal it from you, so thank you. Now, a month from now, I'm going to be giving this talk again, and I'm going to use that, and you're like, that son of a gun.
No, that's all you.
So, okay, so, all right, so what are some of the best practices? What are the things how do we actually build, and where do we start? And with most applications, you got to start with the pipeline. Okay, how do you actually start building secure applications from the ground up? Because it's way easier to build something that's good versus trying to fix it after the fact. Kind of to stick with our building a house analogy, you want to make sure you're building with, pressure treated lumber and not something that's rotten that you're just going to have to replace down the road, right? So looking at, okay, data ingestion. So, okay, are we using validated and sanitized data sets? How are we storing it? Are we putting proper controls? And what I do like about AI systems is on the surface they look quite complex, but once you start breaking them down into the different layers of the application, they break down like many other tiered applications that we have out there that we're already using, that in terms of their physical components, their actual application components, and how do you actually protect those. So doing things like encrypting data at rest, those types of little things are actually going to have significant impact. The other thing is on model training, so make sure you're doing it with isolated environments. So one of the, I think the biggest mistakes AI developers are making right now because first off, most everybody's taking an off-the-shelf commercial model or open source model and deploying it within their environment. Very few organizations are investing in actually writing their own models. They're just kind of taking something and then manipulating it with trainable data, with their data sets. But are you training it against your entire SharePoint library? Or are you actually taking and building a trainable data, a data warehouse for your training data, pointing the model towards that, doing your testing and validating, making sure that the responses you're getting are what you're expecting before you just kick it to production? Or are you just pointing it towards your domain and hoping for the best, basically, which is, again, a lot of what we're seeing. The other thing is around your model deployment itself and protecting the endpoints, understanding, using secure API configurations, those types of basic things are going to go a long way in protecting your data as you move through the application itself. So any questions, like comments on the pipeline side? What are you guys seeing? Has anyone actually tried to, actually crack, AI pipeline at this point?
So maybe not crack, but when building threat models for some AI chat agent systems that I've seen, I think the biggest issue is there's fundamental AppSec issues that people think that they're not actually addressing. For example, on the ingestion pipeline, you have validate your data sources, sanitize your inputs, verify integrity. They will maybe do one of those, right? Well,
Yeah.
say, I have an implied trust with my data source. Okay, well that doesn't change that you could have null values in your data source, or that
100%.
even though you trust it now, you don't trust it 6 months from now.
Right.
Or something.
And I see a lot of what you just mentioned about they might be validating it at the very, very beginning, but then they're not looking at it for months. They're constantly making updates and changes to that data set without revalidation, which is something I shake my head at. But yeah, and we'll talk a little bit more about what you just mentioned with the other, the AppSec fundamentals that they're not doing, because yeah, it's interesting to see, because you're exactly right. Everyone, from a security leadership standpoint, unfortunately, I think there's a misconception that AI applications are very different in terms of the security measures and protocols that you should be doing from a traditional web application, for example. And while there are key differences, let's not denounce those, but there's also a lot of similarities that you can apply things you're already doing, like DAS testing, like data set validation. All those things that you would do for a normal application, you should be doing for them as well. Do you have something you want to say? So. It's interesting. Are you using Threat Modeler for your threat modeling?
No, no automated tools. We start with most teams at a manual level, because when you use an automated tool like Threat Modeler or Areas Risk or something like that, there's a barrier to entry for folks who don't necessarily know how to practice threat modeling in a formalized manner. So like the approach of identifying your scope and then moving through and documenting it, and then going through and validating what you've documented, and then coming back to your threat model and updating it after your validation. You're only seeing one of those sets of steps happening at any given time, rather than running through the entire process as a full iterant.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes back to kind of that idea that you were bringing up, which is there's this misconception among the C-suite that AI is some sort of totally new and different technology that throws the entire rulebook out the window, and it's not. And with threat modeling, the intention is go through your 4-step framework, and if you can understand that, it doesn't matter if you're using a tool or if you're doing it manually on a whiteboard. You have a consistently repeatable process.
Yeah.
And so that's my problem with trying to offset it with just tools, is if you don't integrate the tools into the education and process of the people using the tool is worthless, or potentially only reinforces negative validation that you
stakeholders and engineers and testers and VAs all together. Because what ends up happening is when you first put a chart up there, everyone's like, that's not right. Even the person who made the chart didn't make it right to their own perception of what it is.
Yeah.
And so that's why I bring up specifically threat modeling as a manual process, is getting everyone on that same page is kind of a prerequisite to then being able to use a tool like Threat Modeler to facilitate doing it continuously.
Yeah, and so I've used Dread before doing AI threat modeling before, and I felt like it worked pretty well. Are you guys using that, or are you using like Stride or one of the other ones?
It really depends on which team, like where the team's maturity is. Generally, if they're maybe just starting to get into threat models, or what we see specifically in the public space is maybe they're not the incumbent on a contract and they have to learn everything about a system that they just inherited. In those instances, I really see threat modeling helping validate, what is the reality versus the expectation of reality. And so Stride starts really simple with it. If they're more intermediate to advanced, I'll use Dread, or you can use what's MITRE's new AI overlay, like Sparta or something.
Yeah.
But when you're looking at those or attack trees, if you don't have your fundamentals of how do you do identity, how do you do logging, how do you do information disclosure or remediation, those fundamental questions make it harder to go into more advanced systems.
Of course, somebody wants to call me like right when, sorry. They probably saw I was online and they joined to call me. That's what I get. I should have disconnected, so my apologies.
But short answer is, I try and meet the team where they're at. And so no one framework is going to expose everything, because no application, even AI applications, are built the same.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, and so my team. So I've got a governance, risk, and compliance team underneath me, and we do a lot of threat modeling. And Dread's kind of our go-to because we like the depth that it gets to. But you're not wrong. And if it's a very immature team to threat modeling, they tend to struggle with Dread's complexity, especially when you layer in a complex application like AI.
Yeah.
So no, it's good stuff. I think. Yeah, I skipped ahead as I was frantically trying to reduce or get rid of that phone call. But all right, so what is the next step? So okay, we secured the pipeline aspect of it. All right, what is the other things we need to be doing? Well, first thing, the other thing we need to be doing is knowing the data that we're using, where it exists. So this is where things like DSPM solutions can be helpful. I will say they are not silver bullets. Please do not treat them as such, but they can be helpful, especially when you're talking about protected data types. They can be helpful identifying that, understanding where your data state, how it is actually dispersed. So when we talked about data sprawl at the very beginning, this is a tool that can help you manage that. You guys, everybody here familiar with Wiz? You guys, have you ever used Wiz? Wiz has got a pretty good one that's pretty helpful, especially for cloud data sets. Not so good for on-prem, but for cloud, pretty good. So being able to detect not just where that data is, but also help you with the configuration and security controls of the data stores where that data is residing. So identifying those misconfigurations and telling you, hey, where do you have exposed data at? Helping you manage the access plane of it. Really helpful, as well as monitoring. So here's something we haven't talked about yet, is how do you monitor AI applications? How do you get those logs into your SIEM, whatever it may be? Then how do you build threat detection content that's actually meaningful around those logs? So we'll get to that in a little bit, but something that's really helpful. Another tool that came out, and again, these are not silver bullets. I'm the first to say that security solutions are the #1 overpromising thing in the world. Do not believe they would. Do not believe what they say. Even the good ones, the reputable ones, just don't believe them. They are all lying to your face. But that doesn't mean they don't have value. They definitely help give you visibility. They help you understand what's out there. So don't dismiss them either, right? But so having AI security posture management tools like Model Armor, which is Google's new one that's getting released next quarter, I believe, is really helpful because what they do is they help you do things like inventory your AI applications. So we talked about shadow AI and understanding that. It's going to help you reduce that risk. It's going to help you reduce that attack surface. It's also going to help you inventory your APIs that are going into your AI apps. So you can, again, make sure those protections in place. Again, this is about reducing your attack surface. This is about actually putting policies in place to manage on it, putting alerts in place to help notify the security teams when something's wrong, and then also getting logs into a SIM so you can aggregate it into something bigger. So here's something interesting. So we kind of talked about threat modeling already, but one of the things I always talk about, is anyone familiar with software bill of material audits, like software composition analysis? Going through those exercises with your AI apps is incredibly important. It's probably more important, I think, than most any other application out there. Of course, I am biased, but and why is it important? Because it helps you really understand what components make up your AI systems. And then, okay, going through and actually looking at the threats that are affecting each layer and each item, and doing those composition analysis, doing vulnerability management against it. All those are really important things, because that's how, honestly, your biggest risks for getting your AI system, popped. I mean, it's going to happen, through one of those layers, and being able to have that visibility and take proactive action is going to be helpful. We can talk more about threat modeling. I know we kind of touched on it a little bit already, so you skipped ahead a couple of slides on me, man. But any kind of questions on like the SBOM, SCA aspect of it, the threat modeling aspect of it? We're going really broad strokes, but I want to dive in deep where you guys have questions. Nobody?
I guess, how would you tune signal to noise for that group that has their own role management stack and their own SIM and their own et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? By the time they get to a technology of even standard SBOMs, like why should they prioritize doing AI SBOMs over or instead of any of those?
Because AI systems are going to have traditionally, they're going to have access to way more data and way more sensitive data than your average application.
Well, you mentioned that customers are kind of preferential right now, picking up something off the shelf.
Yeah.
If they're going through and doing that, and there's that implied trust of that, do they get anything from the AI SBOM? Is there a world where once they start looking through either the Hugging Face card or the AI SBOM, they end up actually deciding, no, we need to go and do our own or use a different off-the-shelf one?
No, I haven't run into that yet. I think, and here's the reason why I think is most security teams are still digesting AI and understanding what it really means. So I think to give them anything is probably, at this point, is enough. The reality is you're not wrong. I think you're going to have to tune those policies. You're going to have to tune all that to be very specific to the industry, the needs, the model, even like the model that's being used, right? And once you're able to tune those policies with like a black duck, for example, you're going to be able to have more effective outputs of those SBOM tools. But what I also say is like kind of going back to the manual part of it as well, like doing a manual SBOM analysis, and it's a heavy lift. It takes time, but it really helps the security teams think about all the different layers of your AI applications and how they can be attacked. And once they start thinking about it, then they can start really effectively protecting it. And this is something that if you're ever an opportunity, because I know I'm talking to a bunch of hackers, if you're ever doing a pen test against an AI application, have these conversations after the fact. When you're doing your postmortem to show them how you gained entry, have these conversations with the AI engineers, the security team, the developers, so they understand, okay, here's how we gained access, here's why it was important, so on and so forth. But also the infrastructure team, don't forget about the infrastructure layer of your AI apps. So, and then audits, as much as I hate audits, I think we all do, they do serve a purpose, and they can help keep teams honest. What I've found, honestly, though, with audits is you get more out of the preparation and the readiness aspect than the actual audit itself, because it's going to make your security teams really think about, oh crap, I got to go make sure all this is up to date and ready to go because we've got an audit coming in 6 months. And as sad as that is, sometimes that motivation or urgency is what you need to get action out of them. So, questions on that? Okay, so here's where I said zero trust. You guys told you I would get there. Zero trust is, I'm going to start all this by saying, in my opinion, zero trust is a buzzword that is 5 years old, that nobody could really do very effectively, but it's somehow stuck around in our world, and we still have to deal with it. But what does zero trust really mean? It's, how do you effectively manage access to assets, data, systems, and ensure that the right people are the only ones that have access to the exact privilege level they need when they need it, and you have boundaries and borders set up to prevent cross-contamination of data. That's how I look at zero trust. So
So now that you're saying least privilege.
yeah, I mean, but it's more than just least privilege. Least privilege, I think, is a really big part of it, but it's also having those boundaries set up to prevent data, moving cross-border into environments that it
Well,
shouldn't.
that means you also have to define the privileges properly.
Yeah. Yeah.
I also want to point out systems change, so privilege change.
Yes.
So even if I have least privilege today, that may not be least privilege
Right.
tomorrow.
Right.
How do we surface that changes happen, and how do I inherit those changes as quickly as possible too?
And that's where the context awareness comes into play. Understanding the context and how the context changes constantly, I think, is important for zero trust to be truly effective. But kind of tying it back to data and AI is why is that important? You have to think of AI in a lot of ways as a machine identity. And you want to make sure that machine identity only has access to the data you want it to. You don't want to give it pervasive access across your entire environment. You want to limit it. Additionally, you also want to, depending on, especially for Gen AI, you want to be able to limit the response, not just based on the machine identity, but the identity and privilege level of the user that's asking a question. So, go ahead.
Or the processor agent.
Say that again?
Or processor agent, not just user.
Correct. So if you think about for Gen AI, you really have to think about it in two ways. The machine identity of the AI bot or process, but then also the user's identity and privilege level that's putting in the prompt. And what are they allowed to see? And what are their privilege levels? And if you can do that effectively, which is hard, and it takes a ton of active management, but doing that is really the best way to ensure you're not going to give, sensitive HR information. I think this is probably the most classic example everyone gives for this use case is, somebody's, puts in a prompt around employee pay, and it spits back a spreadsheet, that's got the entire company's pay info for all the employees, and they can see what everybody makes. They should have never had access to that. So how do you limit that? So I think that's where zero trust is important for AI. I will also say I put it towards the end of this presentation for a reason. I think there are bigger issues that we need to be, well, it is important. I think there are more important issues to address. And just like with every security team out there, they have to prioritize, they have to budget. You only have so much resource, so much money, so much time to actually implement these things. And where is AI where is zero trust in this stack of priorities? Go ahead.
Yeah, but if you're talking about priorities, if you could, in some imaginary world, solve this problem, wouldn't that solve a lot of the other problems?
Not necessarily, because you're still opening yourself. The attack surface it goes much beyond the user layer. So, because your attack surface isn't just at a user level.
But then if those below those levels don't have the right privilege.
Yeah, but if you're able to crack that layer, you're cracking the privilege layer at down the stack, so you're able to still get access to the data. So, I hear what you're saying. I just again, it's all about where you want to focus your time and effort. I think from an ROI, return on investment of your time, your effort, your money, you're going to be better served protecting the data at the database layer, not the user access layer. So, any other thoughts, questions? Okay. All right, so kind of what's the future? What do I see that's going to happen in the next 12 months with AI? So we'll do this slide, then we'll have about 15 minutes or so for some just discussion. I know we've been discussing throughout the whole time, but I love the fireside chat models. I like just kind of talking. So what are the things that, I think that I'm starting to see that I think are going to become really more important? One is federated learning. So are you guys familiar with the concepts of federated learning? Okay. All right. So federated learning is where you're actually enable models to train, you have multiple models to train on a reduced number of data sets. You're also allowed to reduce data centralization. So you're now able to compartmentalize data sets. This is really helpful in a regulatory space. It also helps you have both one model tied to multiple data sets, as well as multiple data sets tied to, or multiple models tied to one data set. So it allows for that, which I think is really cool, and that's going to help because from a protection standpoint. So it allows you to be both decentralized as well as centralized, which is good. The other thing is around collaboration on AI projects. So more and more, I think we're starting to see this, where there's more collaboration across the space, which is good. I think it's going to only accelerate the capabilities of AI, especially as we move into like 2026. I think we're going to see another really big leap forward in agentic AI capabilities. But what does that mean from a security standpoint, right? And how do we counter that? And then the transparency part. So this is where I think the industry has struggled. But there's been a huge both regulatory push as well as social push for transparency in your AI models. And I think we're going to really start to see that in this year. So. All right, so with that, what do you guys want to talk about?
Do you have any examples of organizations that are kind of moving towards a federated learning model? Just like as a better example of like.
So from a production standpoint, no. And the reason is I think most organizations are still struggling to get, the current kind of, generative AI models in production and being effective. They're not even thinking about this at a production level yet. Yeah, of course, especially in larger enterprise, in the tech firms, there's researchers doing tons of work on it. But from an actual real-world production use case, nah, I think we're 12 months away from seeing anything like that.
It's all POC right now.
Yeah.
I have heard of a couple of companies, I can't name drop them, but in terms of federated learning, I've seen it also been tag-driven training is what it.
Yeah, I've seen tag-driven training as well.
And so the intention there is you remove the need to provide identity, but you assume that the training mechanism only has the ability to query the data that it's tagged.
Right.
So you're kind of shifting where your requirement is away from, hey, this machine as a machine identity has access to these data sets, and you're moving towards this caller who has access to call all of my data sets is only requesting a subset of them.
Yeah.
So in an ideal world, you would have both. You'd have an identity-based system that says, I'm not only giving you access to the data set, but I'm also only giving you access to a certain set of tags tied to your identity. And then likewise, I'm not exposing any data that isn't explicitly tagged with the specific tag.
So yeah, that's the concept of color coding. So have you seen that where it's like, okay, blue AI systems can access blue data, where no matter where within your environment that blue data lives, right? Same thing with yellow, red, so on, right? So it's the color coding technique, which has been pretty effective. So, but what they're doing there is not necessarily decentralizing that data. They're just saying, here's this massive data set. We're just limiting what color data you can, within this data set, you can actually use. So.
That kind of actually goes back to one of your earlier prompts around the ingestion pipeline. If the data is a huge data set and the tag is off by one letter, you are now spending time and money and AppSec time, really, to figure out where that problem went wrong in your pipeline.
Yeah.
And then that has a trickle-down effect to everything for your rework.
Yeah. But that also puts into, like, when you start looking at like prompt engineering and prompt injections, it's going to open you up to those types of attacks even more if you mistag and mislabel stuff. So. Right. Any other? Yeah.
So we're running out of time, and I don't want to throw too much of a
I can sit here all afternoon, so it's cool.
But, well, I think you'll get kicked out when somebody starts talking. Red teams, like you said, talk about zero trust, talk about red teams. Like red teams like to live in the 1% of companies with security. Where would you start in the AI data security in the normal landscape of can we even patch? So
Yeah,
companies that
can you patch? Yeah, but you're patching at the
companies
component.
that don't even have the maturity to be patching regularly.
Yeah.
Where would you start with?
I would say that if you cannot patch, you need to do two things. One, you need to put in sufficient compensating controls around your AI systems. You also need to be, I would caution them to allow their AI systems access to critical business data, critical, protected data types, because the risk is just going to be off the charts in that case. And you're right, there are so many customers out there that don't, they can't patch correctly, they can't do zero trust, so what makes them think they can secure AI application? But that's not going to stop the business from doing it either. So how do we, both as attackers and defenders, how do we, do our best to make sure that they're being, as safe as possible and reducing their risk and reducing that attack surface where they can. Any other questions? Awesome, guys. Well, thank you for the time. Really appreciate it.